Good evening, everyone. Busy place here today, so I'm going to keep things going. Thank you for coming to this debate between the candidates for the 33rd State Senate seat. Thanks also to those of you who sent in questions for the candidates. We received an impressive number of questions and have done our best to use as many of them as possible. I'd also like to thank Lee Rankin, Region 4 Facilities Manager, and her staff for working with us to provide this beautiful facility. I'm Richard Conroy, Director of the Essex Library, and with me is Tom Piezzo, Director of the Library in Haddam. We'll be serving as moderators tonight, and joining us this evening are Democrat Norm Needleman and Republican Melissa Gibran. Sorry, Melissa. I'm going to call you guys by your first names, by the way.
That sounds great.
Because Norm's got a long last one, and I always screw up Melissa's. Debate will last approximately an hour and a half. A minimum of 8 questions will be asked, and the candidates will answer additional questions if time allows. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to make an opening statement. The order in which they are speaking has been predetermined by a coin toss. Better slow it down a little here. They will each also have an opportunity to make a 3-minute closing statement in the reverse order in which the opening statements will be made. The same questions will be asked of both candidates. They'll each have 3 minutes to answer the question, as well as 1 minute of rebuttal time. Questions will not be accepted from the audience, and the candidates will not be permitted to ask questions of each other unless they do so during their allotted times. You are permitted to take photographs if you'd like, but please do not use a flash. And if you have a cell phone with you this evening, please turn it off or set it to vibrate rather than ring right now. Members of the audience are asked to remain quietly in their seats and be respectful of the speakers at all times. Anyone who fails to do so will be asked to leave. So without further ado, we'll begin the debate with a recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by Norm Needleman's opening statement. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Sake of the candidates, I don't know if we explained to you, but we do have these timers here, and you'll hear a buzz. I'm kind of liberal about, not to use the wrong term, generous about letting it go a little bit over if necessary, but please try to keep yourselves within the time allotment. So we'll start off with Norm.
Did I go first?
I think you wanted to go last, Norm.
I wanted to go last.
He chose last.
Yeah,
so
you go. Let me get this straight here. You go first now and last at the end. That's the way that works.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you guys for hosting this debate tonight, and thank you, Lee, if she's out here. Everyone in this room knows that we have choices. The choices we make in this election are vitally important. What's at stake is how our towns will be treated on the difficult road to straightening out our state's finances. It hasn't gone well for us in the past few years. We send tens of millions of dollars to Hartford and get less and less support in return. We cannot let that continue. That's why we need a strong advocate in the state Senate, an individual who knows what it takes to budget and manage services in a small municipality. My track record building a business and in town governance speaks for itself. Working side by side with Democrats, Republicans, and independents, we've kept taxes amongst the lowest in the state, streamlined government, and created jobs and revenue by making the town home to over 700 businesses. We balance budgets every year I've been in office. My responsibility, however, goes much further than manipulating line items in a spreadsheet. Every day, I am responsible for making those budgets and services work in the real world. Budget management skills and job creation success combine to make me uniquely qualified to be part of the solution in Hartford. What counts just as much as my experience and track record is what I will do if you choose to send me to Hartford. So tonight, I will make it clear where I stand on the issues that are important to all of us. I will tell you in plain language what I will support and what I won't. I'm a businessman and a problem solver who has been deeply involved in my community, both as a volunteer and as an elected official. I'm not a politician. I'm not running as a stepping stone to higher office, and I don't need a job. I'm a candidate for the state senate for a few reasons. First, to be an advocate that helps every town in our district get their fair share of support for education and infrastructure dollars. And second, to revitalize the economy in our state. Most of you know that Jackie and I are committed to our community. Me through public service and the business I started, her through the Ivoryton Playhouse. My sons, who now run the company we started, are equally committed. I have 5 beautiful grandchildren and 1 more on the way. Recently found that out. I just added that half a line. I do want to do what I can to ensure that everything I love about our district and our state is preserved and protected for them. Thank you.
Please hold your applause. That gives us more time for them to talk than us. Melissa, you're next, please.
Thank you. I'm Melissa Gebrin. It's been my privilege to represent Colchester, East Haddam, East Hampton for the last 6 years. I would like to thank the organizers of this debate this evening as well. It would be foolhardy not to acknowledge the deep partisan rift that defines politics today. I'm a moderate Republican who is fiscally conservative and socially liberal. This means when the knives come out, I get it from both sides. Sounds fun? Not really. But I know trading barbs is something that comes with the job. But what's important is in these exchanges is that we share factual information and listen to each other. I'm here as much to listen as to talk. As your voice in Hartford, I've worked hard not only to listen, but to communicate clearly and in good faith. Like you, I'm frustrated with the lack of attention on our fiscal crisis. This is, in essence, why I'm running for the state senate. One-party rule has crippled our state during the last 8 years. What is at stake is the last chance to right our sinking ship. During the last 2 years as the minority party, our input into the budget process was critical. For the first time in history, a true bipartisan budget was formulated. If not for the minority meeting Republican intervention, we would be without many key things. A constitutional spending cap, we achieved that first promise 27 years ago. Over $1 billion in the rainy day fund. A fair and balanced education cost sharing formula, and millions more in funding retired teacher health care. Equally important, our ability to block a half a dozen brand new Democrat formulated tax increase proposals. What made this possible? Equal party representation in our Senate. This seat, your state Senate seat, is crucial to maintaining this balance. In fact, I will say that one of the reasons I decided to sacrifice my position in the House was to maintain the opportunity to advocate and include fiscally conservative policies which are critical for the health of our beautiful state. I want Connecticut to thrive and prosper, but more importantly, it has to live within its means. You know my commitment to this district is unmatched, as is my work ethic. We can turn our state around. Please vote for me on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Norm, you get the first question first. Both of you have significant government experience, but neither of you has served as a state senator. What do you think is the most important aspect of your experience in government that makes you more qualified than your opponent to serve as a senator?
Thanks for that question, Richard. So it's not only my experience in government that I think helps. The state legislature obviously is a two-house legislature. There's a lot of state reps, and a lot of them are very specifically expert on one thing or another. And I have no qualms about Melissa's expertise on managing one aspect of the state government, the budget. But I don't think that we're going to solve this alone by cutting the budget up, cutting it, tearing it down. That's part of it. But the part of it that's going to make a difference for Connecticut in the long run is actually figuring out how to grow the state's economy. That you can't cut your way out of this, you can't tax your way out of it, you have to grow your way out of it. I've spent my entire working career, besides figuring out the best ways to do things with the least amount of money, which I certainly had to do because I started a business with zero capital that was a capital-intensive business. So I learned how to make do with very little. But I also understand very clearly what it is to create jobs and develop an economy. That's what I've done. We employ 150 people here, and another 75 or 100 out of the state, and I'm very proud of that. We have built this. We treat our people well. We manage to do an awful lot. We're very good in our community, and at 50 years old, I decided I would get involved in public service. It didn't really happen by design, but it happened, and I'm very grateful it did because I've had an opportunity to participate at the town level for a long time. I think that what we need when we look to hire our next state senator is somebody who has broader experience than just doing one thing. I know how to manage a budget. I've built budgets. I put them enacted them. I live by them. We do it in the town. We've managed to control our spending. There were a couple of flyers that sent out that I raised taxes 15%. What they didn't say in that flyer was that was over 7 years. Our budgets have kept pace with inflation and no more. And anybody who lives in Essex or lives in our area knows that we continue to do more with the same amount of money or with less. We have improved the quality of life. Essex is the home to 700 businesses. Our grand list is growing, not contracting. People are investing on our community, and that's what we need in the state. People have to come here and look at the state of Connecticut and say, we have leaders that have broad experience, not that are limited to doing one thing or another. That's just not going to cut it going forward.
Thank you. Melissa, same question?
Thank you, and I want to thank my opponent for recognizing my budget acumen. It's a $40 billion two-year budget. It's not something that the average person can just walk in and understand on day one. In fact, the Appropriations Committee is one of the largest committees in the legislature, made up of 52 people. And for the last 4 years, I haven't been just a member of that committee, but I've been the ranking member or the highest ranking individual in the House Republican caucus, leading 70 people and reporting back and working to implement policies. I am well known at the Capitol for several things. One is my work ethic. Very often, I am the first one at the Capitol and the last one to leave. There's a lot of people who simply show up, get a vote in, and off they go to something else, whether it's another job or another commitment. I have made it my sole focus to understand the budget, not just to cut, know where to cut, but more importantly, where not to cut. We have critical social services. We have declining revenue, which is forcing our state to make extremely, extremely difficult decisions. And whoever is elected, regardless of whether it's this Senate seat or others, are going to be walking into the Capitol in January, and they're going to be starting to craft a budget within 5 weeks. It's not a lot of time to learn on the job. And I can assure you that my focus will be the 12 towns of this Senate district and making sure that you are getting the most important funding, whether it's for your education funding, 9-town transit, or looking at, again, what are those critical services that we need to preserve. The other thing I do at the Capitol is work on our state parks. As a member of the Environment Committee, I'm not a one-dog pony, as my opponent would like to suggest. I work very hard on the Environment Committee, coming up with programs that help our park system. In fact, working through that process, I was able to secure outside donations so that Gillette Castle, for the first time in 4 years, will be open for the entire holiday season. That's the kind of work ethic I have, is trying to figure out what is needed and how we can make things happen. And sometimes it doesn't require state tax dollars to do that. Being proactive and immersed in your community is something I'm proud of, and I'll continue to work on that when I'm your next state senator. Thank you.
Thank you. Norm, you want a minute to follow up?
Thank you. So Essex is the home to a large number of nonprofits. And they are, I mean, we get a lot done without tax dollars, and I think that that's very important. But tax dollars, state revenue, which tends to be a one-way street for many of the towns in our district, we send it to Hartford and we get very little back, needs to be apportioned fairly. And I think that that's one of the things about being an advocate that we're going to need to make sure we do. I would say that some things cannot be done by volunteers. And my opponent tends to say no a lot more than she says yes, especially to things that tend to be quite important to our community and our communities, because I have a list of all the things that she voted no to that ended up either passing because, as she said, the other party passed them. So I got to go back to one other thing, the idea of
Quickly.
one-party rule. Okay.
Melissa, you have a minute to follow?
Sure. I mean, the only follow-up I would give is that, you know, I have said no more than some other folks, because when you don't have any money, you have to look at everything and objectively. So, for instance, we have a court system that can't start on time because we don't have court marshals or the folks who are transcribing the proceedings. But yet, Governor Malloy wanted to appoint over almost 40 new judges in a system that couldn't even start on time. That's hypocritical. We can't afford it. We need to make sure our court systems are starting on time, so I voted no against every single judge, not because they weren't qualified, but because somebody at the Capitol has got to start standing up and pointing out those issues, and it's something I do, even if sometimes I'm standing by myself.
Thank you. Excuse me. Tom will ask the next question.
So the next question will begin 3 minutes with Melissa. It is widely agreed that our transportation infrastructure is in dire need of major improvements, but there's also disagreement over whether or not tolls should be implemented to pay for infrastructure improvement. So this is a two-part question. Should tolls be implemented? And if not, how will improvements be paid for?
Thank you. So I'm against tolls, and I'm certainly against the tolls that are currently been described by the Department of Transportation. It's not the toll system of our neighboring states. It's 72 tolling locations with congestion pricing. And unfortunately, if only our prioritized progress plan that was developed by the Republican caucus several years ago had been implemented, we would have a lot more money to invest in our infrastructure. However, in the bipartisan budget that was passed, we included a portion of prioritized progress. What is it? Prioritized progress says that we take bonding dollars. Right now, you have the Special Transportation Fund. My friends across the aisle have taken almost $140 million out of that fund to put it into the general fund and to support ongoing programs. And that is one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in today. But the prioritized progress instead prioritize general obligation bonds and uses those bonds to offset the transportation costs. And over the next 5 years, if that program is continued, we'll have keep the Special Transportation Fund solvent for the first time in a long time. So we have to be very cognizant of how we're spending, especially bonding dollars, because over the last 8 years, Governor Malloy has doubled your bonding. And what do I mean by your? Because you're paying the debt service every year in the budget. And this is going to sound like a crazy number because it is. Before Governor Malloy took office, we were bonding about $1.8 billion a year. $1.8 billion. That's a lot of money for sure. But Governor Malloy doubled it. He started bonding to the limits of over $3 billion. For priority projects? Not necessarily. Just 3 weeks ago, you all have probably read in the newspaper where we bonded money for a splash pad in New Haven. Or I could talk about some other projects as well. We need to make sure that when we borrow money, we're spending it on our priorities, and our transportation system is that priority. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Norm, would you?
3 minutes is a long time. So I certainly wouldn't support the toll plan that the DOT came out with, but I suspect that over time, we're going to end up having to do some kind of tolls. I go back to what the Commission on Fiscal Stability came up with, and they had a package of suggestions that included tolls. Not a big fan of them. I remember when Connecticut had them. It would certainly not be like that now. I would never give the DOT the approval to actually make those decisions. I think that has to be made by the governor and the legislature. I wish we didn't have to consider tolls. What I think Melissa hasn't really told you is that to prioritize transportation, all the things that would be cut would be catastrophic for many parts of the state. You know, you look, I love the idea of sort of calling out the worst example in a $3 billion bonding package and say that that's the rule rather than the exception. So Melissa has voted against 2 out of the 3 bonding packages that she was in the legislature for, and some of those things were instrumental in improving our towns. When you know, I love this idea that you sort of pick everything apart and find the worst example and then call the whole thing bad. Bonding is critical. Nothing should be bonded for 20 years that's not going to last 20 years. That's just good business. You never depreciate an asset or pay for it over longer than the life of it, and I would make sure that I would never support anything. But in a huge package that includes things like steep grants, which every town in our district has benefited from, yeah, sometimes the executive branch and OPM decides to approve a project that we may not see as important here, because we request money for civic campuses and sidewalks and the things that are essential. But we don't live in the cities. We want to make sure that there's a quality of life in the cities that are important. So of all the priorities for long-term capital, transportation is critical, and I'm afraid that the Republicans and their plan would look to take away money from other things that are as important. That's why the rubber meets the road at figuring out how do we get forward here, maintain the quality of life, and at the same time manage our finances and manage our growth. It's going to take investment to move this state forward, appropriate investment, and I would argue that I'm the better candidate to determine what is appropriate, because I've lived with these kinds of decisions for 40 years. It's not new to me, and I'm not at all worried about hitting the ground running in the legislature. If Melissa's reasoning was correct, nobody would ever elect someone new, and I would argue that Hartford is the problem, not the solution.
3 minutes, thank you. Please don't applaud.
1 minute.
3
to
minutes is longer than you
respond.
think. Shorter
1
than you
minute,
think.
Melissa.
I think you went over your time.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to redo that so you don't get, when you're ready, how's that?
I'm all set, thank
Okay.
you. So I certainly am not suggesting that we shouldn't be changing the makeup of the legislature. In fact, what I'm saying to you is our problems are so enormous, we can't afford to send somebody into the Capitol that is not ready to hit the ground on day one. When we start that new process, we're going to be dealing with a budget that's out of balance by almost $4.5 billion. That's going to require steadfast, hard work, and hopefully somebody who understands the way the budget is currently built, even though it's somewhat of a flawed process. The second thing I would say is it's not the legislature who determines what's in the bond commission package. It's the bond commission, and that's chaired by the governor, along with several members, a couple members of the legislature and his cabinet. So with all due respect, we don't get to tell the governor which projects he's putting on his bond commission agenda. It's just not how it works.
Yep. Thank you.
Nor, would you like a minute to respond?
Really quickly, I absolutely agree that there's a flawed process out there, but I have never, look, 40 years building a company, another 7 years in the business world, started working when I was 12 in a grocery store, drove a cab for 4 years. I know how to learn quickly, and I learn a lot, and I learn it quickly. I followed the state budgeting process because as a first selectman and a selectman now for 15 years, it impacts me directly on a daily basis. So I'm not worried about learning what's there. Again, that would be the excuse for never electing somebody that's not an insider, and I would argue that the insiders have created the problem. 40 years, I'm not laying this at the feet of one party or another, 40 years worth of mismanagement. It is time that we bring people into that process that have a broader view of reality than tweaking here and tweaking there. This is a big problem. We need crisis management. People have to be read the Riot Act and begin to really address the problems long-term, not in 2-year increments.
Thank you. Next question goes to you first, Norm. Connecticut is one of only 13 states that applies a state income tax to Social Security benefits. Would you support eliminating this tax? And in general terms, what other forms of taxation would you consider changing, and how would you do so?
So my understanding is that they did that. They eliminated taxing the Social Security tax for people below a certain income level in the last session, and I think that that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think they're looking for across the board. The person asked the question.
Well, if you're asking me if I believe in a progressive income tax, I believe in a more progressive income tax. I believe that people at the lower end of the spectrum should pay less, and people like me at the higher end of the spectrum should probably pay a little bit more. I believe that any adjustments to the income tax in the short run should be revenue neutral, shouldn't be looked at as a way to raise more money at this point. But I certainly believe that pensions and Social Security money for average working people that have spent their whole lives trying to save for a decent retirement should be taxed at a much lower rate, if at all. So I think that one of the flaws in our system and in Connecticut up to now is the fact that we were taxing people, and that drove people out of the state. And I think that I'm glad that that has changed, and I think that there's more that can be done.
Okay, Melissa?
Thank you. And again, I thank my opponent for acknowledging some of our hard work in the bipartisan budget. We did phase out the tax on Social Security and pensioners who are making $100,000 or less. It was the right thing to do, but it never would have happened without a bipartisan conversation with 6 leaders sitting across the table negotiating those things. And I'm proud to say that I was in the room as part of that group of people in a bipartisan way. It was a long process. I mean, I want you to kind of close your eyes and go back to 2017. 2017, we developed a budget on time on my side of the aisle for the Appropriations Committee deadline in April. My friends on the other side of the aisle did not. They had no budget ready on their deadline. That stalled process continued. We revamped the budget 10 times on our side of the aisle until we finally had their proposal delivered sometime in August, 3 months late. And the budget was finally finalized in October. But because of the minority party, it included some of those very important provisions. Another provision that it included, because of minority representation, was the fact that we cut in half the sales tax on boats, which is critically important to our shoreline communities. And what happened when we did that? Boat sales in Connecticut climbed by 40%, and that's a fact. And the reason it happened is because people were going to Rhode Island where they weren't paying any tax at all. So while we didn't eliminate the sales tax on boats, we cut it in half, and that has made a huge difference to many of our small businesses on our shoreline, and it's brought people from residents in Connecticut who were going to Rhode Island back to our communities. It's really been amazing for me to take some time and visit the wonderful marinas and boating community along the shoreline. It's not just a bunch of rich people. It's people who are painting the bottom of our boats, mechanics. These are blue-collar jobs. And by reducing the tax, we're able to actually grow the revenue and provide stability for a commercial entity and those small businesses, which was sorely needed over the last few years.
Thank you. Norm? No follow? Okay. Tom's got the next question for you.
Okay, so for Melissa to start, under the Malloy administration, the state of Connecticut offered various types of financial incentives to either attract new businesses or keep companies already based in the state from moving elsewhere. Do you support providing these types of incentives? And if not, what would you suggest should be done to make our state more business friendly?
Thank you. So I do support a robust incentives as far as really doing the research and getting to the small businesses, not the big guys. There's been some terms thrown around, one of which is corporate welfare, and I think when we start giving hundreds of millions of your tax dollars away to large corporations, we're on a very slippery slope. The bigger problem we have is that DECD is not doing their due diligence. In fact, about 3 weeks ago, I was at the Capitol for a public hearing because DECD's annual report was full of misinformation and huge assumptions which turned out to be proven false by the state auditors. We need to do a better job so when we are assisting our businesses, we can make sure that they're doing some basic things. Have they paid their taxes? We know that we've given your tax dollars to businesses who haven't even paid their local tax. We're not doing a good enough job in making sure we are stewarding your tax dollars and making sure that those investments have a return on that investment. And that's something that DECD, frankly, has been really struggling with. So do I support some sort of incentives? Yes. But I think it needs to be in a full plan. As Norm has suggested, we certainly, one of the only ways out of this, in combination with additional cuts, is to raise our economy and raise that revenue. So it should be done in a thoughtful way, and that includes not just the legislature, of course, but the governor's office and the DECD commission. And I think that's something where we need to spend a little bit more time focusing in on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Norm?
Thank you. So, if elected, I would really like to be on the Commerce Committee because I believe that that's where economic development, can really happen. I've been saying for a long time what has been lacking in this state, in this administration and prior administrations with no legislative oversight, is we really need a comprehensive plan for economic development in the state. If I ask everybody in this room, what is Connecticut? What is the brand of Connecticut? Most people would tell you that we're halfway between New York and Boston. It's not really a brand, it's a location. I think that we need to focus on defining what we are, defining our brand, and executing against a strategy to build out what Connecticut really could be. And it doesn't mean starting from scratch and starting with things that don't exist here, which has happened in this state. I believe that we have some core strengths. We have the top of the line finance people in the world in Connecticut. We have excellent advanced manufacturing and defense industries. We have insurance. Those are things that we need to build around and make sure that we enhance them. I would like to say that we don't have to look to big companies, but I think it's important sometimes to get anchor businesses in that you can build an industry around or enhance an industry. We've given significant tax breaks to businesses that are here, including Dominion Energy, which was hundreds of millions of dollars to stay in Connecticut, to give them full renewable status, which I'm not sure was the best idea. And I know that if it was me, I probably would have recused myself because if I had anybody working there in my family, I would not have voted on that. But some of the deals that the DECD made were not great. Some of them were fine. I'd actually almost consider pulling in a top business development person that works in the private sector to run something like the DECD and maybe have a quasi-public-private partnership there. Because I think that that's where you need somebody who knows how to grow the economy, develop business, make it rain for business in the state. That's what will grow the state's economy.
Thank you, Norm. 1 minute to reply, Melissa.
Sure, thank you. So the head of DECD has all the character traits that my opponent just laid out, and it still has been a disaster. I think we need to do a better job focusing in on DECD. And one of the things that we have going for us here in this beautiful district is tourism. And it's something that we certainly, I think, should be spending a little bit more time and attention to. But here's what's happened within DECD's budget. Instead of investing dollars in tourism and creating a plan, we've chosen and picked winners and losers. Within the state budget, we give taxpayer dollars to multiple organizations within DECD's budget. And worst of all, we spend more money on the managing account for the tourism for statewide marketing than we do in actually promoting Connecticut. That's wrong, and we can do a better job.
Thank you. Final thoughts, Norm?
So I'm not sure I agree with what Melissa said about Catherine Smith. I'm not sure she's actually that person that I would think would be the right head for that agency. And believe me, I'm no Dan Malloy apologist on the Connecticut Still Revolutionary idea. I don't even know what Connecticut Still Revolutionary means. I think it's kind of an embarrassment. I'm all for tourism. Tourism accounts for $1 in $5 in the state. It's really important, but it's not everything. If I had that money to spend early on when they re-added money to the tourism budget or to the economic development marketing budget, I would have not done a pure tourism buy. Connecticut, New York State, when they advertise live here, work here, visit here. We just advertise Connecticut Still Revolutionary. Like I said, I don't even know what that means. I think it's kind of embarrassing.
Okay, thank you, Norm. And you get to answer the next question first. Many large manufacturers in our state, such as Pratt & Whitney Aircraft and Electric Boat, as well as the smaller subcontractors who supply them with parts, are struggling to find well-trained workers for high-paying jobs. What can the state do to help with this problem?
So I am a manufacturer in this state, and as automation has taken hold in manufacturing, we've struggled. Our business has moved from low-skilled labor to higher-skilled labor. 15 years ago, the people from Middlesex Community College, the then chancellor or president, came to me with a group of his people and said, "What does Connecticut need?" And I said, we are going to be desperate for advanced manufacturing jobs. And now we are here. It's 2018. The average age of skilled machinists, mechanics, and electronic technicians is 58 years old. It's so desperate that companies like mine, Pratt, and EB have started their own apprentice programs. The community colleges and some of the trade schools should have been filled. We should have been promoting that. I'm proud to say that Valley Regional has had a manufacturing apprenticeship at Whalen Engineering. John Olson, who recently passed away, welcomed that opportunity. He helped create that program, brought the administration here and up to their New Hampshire facility by their own plane, I have to say. I don't have a plane. And Ruth Levy saw fit to actually make sure that that program got created. We need more of that in this area, especially in the state of Connecticut. When you go from Pratt and Sikorsky and Electric Boat, they are hubs of this kind of requirement for talent. But there are hundreds of other companies, including mine, that are really suffering from the lack of foresight in that area. It's not the only thing we need. We need more skilled engineers. We need a robust program that trains people how to work in the real world. I think there's been a myth that has been propagated that probably goes back to before I was in college, which was in ancient times, that a four-year liberal arts degree is a great thing to have. And in reality, it doesn't really prepare you for much. When it wasn't that expensive, it was fine. But now we're letting people out of college with $150,000 worth of debt. They're not really trained for anything. I think that we need to make education affordable. We need to make our community colleges more affordable for people so they get trained for the real jobs that exist in our community. There are like 15,000 jobs in Connecticut that can't be filled because of a lack of talent.
Thank you. Melissa, same question?
Thank you. I was really honored to spend some time at Wayland just recently and actually met the kids who are participating in the program from Valley when they were there that day. And absolutely, we need to do more of those kinds of programs. It is a wonderful partnership that is supported by those kinds of businesses in our community, and we're very lucky to have them here. In a recent tour of Middlesex Community College and talking to their folks who do a lot of counseling for the future, I think where we're missing the boat is a couple steps backwards. What I've been told many times from not only Middlesex, but Thames River, is that in our high schools, our guidance counselors are not pushing these opportunities. For whatever reason, our high school counselors are talking a lot about four-year programs when they should be exactly pushing the two-year programs that are available. My opponent mentioned Dominion Energy. Dominion Energy has a wonderful program at Thames Valley that they paid for and developed themselves to teach people how to become nuclear engineers. And it's a wonderful program that guarantees them a job placement when they attend. Those are the kinds of things we need to do, but we got to take a step back and we have to get it into our high schools first and break this stigma that somehow everyone has to go to college. If you haven't had a chance, I encourage you to check out somebody named Mike Rowe. He talks a lot about Mike Rowe Works and jobs, dirty jobs. Those folks are making very, very good money, and there's nothing to be embarrassed about if you're a tradesman working those ways. The second thing you should know is that Governor Malloy vetoed the apprenticeship tax credit that we passed in the last session, and we wanted to override that veto. And of course, the majority party dictates which votes are going to be overridden or not. And I'm sorry to say our friends on the other side refused to override that veto, even though there would have been plenty of votes to do so.
Norm, you have a minute to respond.
I don't think so.
Okay. Melissa, anything to add? Well, you didn't use your whole time, so I guess you're set.
I think we're done.
Okay. On to Tom with the next question.
Okay, shorter question. Have you ever advocated for an idea that was not supported by your political party? It's for Melissa first.
Okay. So yes, as in my opening statement, I'm often used to getting run over by both sides of traffic. I think Margaret Thatcher used to say that. So about when my very first term, the first thing I pushed for was a study of industrial hemp. Industrial hemp has no THC. It's not a Schedule I, but there's amazing things that we could have with hemp. So for instance, our farmers, it's a great crop rotation. It doesn't take great soil. There's so many opportunities. And I'm proud to say that I got that passed. And in my second year, I tried to expand it and mimic the legislation from Kentucky. And what I found out when I got contacted by a researcher from UConn is that my bill was allowing them to do research on industrial hemp at UConn. And at that time, I was thinking about things like clothing, lotions, car parts. You could go on with all the things that could be made. But what they're doing right now at UConn is they're actually pressing it, looking at it for potentially biofuels and also cannabinoids for CBD oil that is very helpful to people who need it for medical purposes. That year was followed up by me taking that leap off the diving board platform against my caucus, and I was the only Republican to propose the legalization of marijuana for those 21 or older. And I did it my first year and second year, and certainly if I'm elected state senator, it's something I'm going to be looking at again. That wasn't an easy thing to do, especially when my friends have very strong opinions. I have been able to work with my caucus and talk about especially social issues behind closed doors and impact their thought process, and it's something I'm very proud of. So I have often taken different stands. The last part was this past session when myself and Senator Kathy Austin were the architects for a program called Passport to Parks. A lot of my caucus members were very against it. I'm committed to our state park system, and with declining revenue was looking for an opportunity to bolster our state parks across this state. And for me, especially as a fiscal conservative, to think about $5 a year to give somebody access to every state park in our state, including our beaches like Hammonasset and Rocky Neck, was not an easy thing to do in my side of the aisle, but I did it because it was the right thing to do.
Thank you. Norm?
That was a tax. I don't use the state parks and I pay it. I'm not complaining, but you can call it whatever you want. It is a tax. When I ran last time, many of you know I ran against Art 2 years ago, and you know, you go through the normal process of requesting endorsements from different people who kind of line up ideologically with you. And I can't tell you the number of people that would normally support Democratic causes that just slam down the phone on me. I am in that category of fiscally conservative, socially progressive Democrats. I know the value of money. I'm very careful with it, and there are a lot of people on my side of the aisle who think you can tax your way out of this. I don't believe that. I no more believe that you can cut your way out of it than I believe you can tax your way out of it. So I haven't been in the legislature, obviously, but one of the things I will say is that my process for making things work and for coming to consensus doesn't really have a lot to do with ideology. There were small things on the Board of Selectmen and larger things on the Board of Selectmen that we've done to make it inclusive. The Republican selectmen on our board before Bruce, when it was Joel and Bruce, oversaw the capital projects plan. That's not about ideology. That's about working in a common sense way to put our best foot forward. There was never any doubt that Bruce knew more about infrastructure than I did, so I asked him to help, and he was gracious and did that. When it came time to put a stop sign in Ivoryton, there were a lot of, it wasn't a partisan issue, but Bruce's proclivity was against stop signs, and I ended up saying, let's try to get this unanimous, so we found a way to make it unanimous. I would say, you know, Melissa keeps touting the bipartisan budget. What ended up happening, because it was an 18-18 vote in the Senate, 3 Democrats left the Democratic caucus and sided with the Republicans. That brought the process to its knees, eventually coming up with a budget. It was a travesty for the state. It was a travesty for towns that they could not agree until October. Towns didn't know if they were going to put out supplemental bills. Some towns had 10% tax increases because there was no way to come to common ground with what the mill rate should be. We were very fortunate in Essex. We were very conservative always, and we're very conservative now. So I'm not sure that I would be touting what happened in 2017 as a path forward.
Thank you, Norm. Melissa, reply?
Thank you. It's interesting to me that somehow the fact that the majority party, your party, didn't do their job and delivered a budget on time, that somehow that's the minority's fault. The reality is,
Please hold your applause.
in 2017, deadlines came and went without the Democrats, the majority party, delivering on a promise to meet deadlines and develop a budget. They didn't do that in April. They didn't do it in May. They didn't do it in June, July, finally in August. The whole time, The minority party had balanced budgets ready to go. We had our budget ready to go on April in 2017, and the leader of your party adjourned the meeting after 3 minutes because they did not have a budget package.
Thank you. Last words, Norm?
Sure. I would say that the budgets that were presented by the not minority party at that point, by the 50-50 party, were not really workable budgets. And again, there was a gun to the head of the legislature, and what they proposed was not really palatable. So there was a stalemate. It was quite unfortunate for the residents of the state of Connecticut. And I would say that every town suffered as a result of that. There were massive upheavals at the town level because of what was done. No organization, no town, no Board of Ed knew what was going to happen well into the fiscal year. To me, that's totally irresponsible, and blaming it on one party is ridiculous.
Okay, thanks. Please hold your applause again. Next question goes to Norm first. Health insurance coverage is a major concern for many small businesses and individuals who simply cannot afford it. The plans available through Access Health CT to those who don't have insurance through their employer are short-term, have very high deductibles, and are repriced every year. What can be done to change Access Health CT in order to make healthcare more affordable? You first, Norm.
I think that we have a massive healthcare crisis in America. I am an employer. I employ a lot of people, and I provide health insurance for individuals and families at the same rate. It's a drag on business to be the ones who have to support healthcare in the United States. You have a small amount or a significant amount of people who are covered through Medicare and Medicaid, but the crux and the basis of health insurance and healthcare in America is paid for by private insurers like me. I'm not sure that there's that much that we can do at a state level, but we need to make sure that there's access to affordable healthcare nationally. And I don't think that anybody has come up with a workable solution. This is not a problem that the market will fix. Trust me, a for-profit health insurance system, a healthcare system where profits are made is not a good one. There are countries in Europe that provide health care for all of its citizens for 11% of GDP. In the United States, we're pushing 19% of GDP. It is an unmanageable and unwieldy system. That said, I think the state needs to make sure it prioritizes health care for the poorest people, and Access Health needs to be made accessible and affordable. The problem is we rely on private insurers to come into the state and insure our people. And that's where the failure is coming. That had in 2009, they had a public option that would have allowed people to get affordable insurance, we would not have the problem. Unfortunately, Connecticut cannot afford that now, so we can't even begin to think about offering it. But there should have been a public option in 2009, and then a lot of the problems that we're facing today would have given people an alternative. With all that bad news, I'll tell you, I was in a store in Portland. I went to a Greasy Spoon up there. Really good breakfast, by the way. Sarah's on Main Street. And she thanked me, and she said to me as I walked out the door, please do me a favor and make sure that they don't do anything to eliminate Access Connecticut, because she and all of her employees participate in that. And having affordable health insurance in this state, having any health insurance in this state for small businesses, small companies, individuals who work on their own, is critical to economic development. I'm afraid that most people don't understand that the mobility afforded by people who can go from employer to employer or start their own business when they want is critical. I wish there weren't high deductibles, but I'm not sure that we have any way to mandate that.
Thank you. Please hold the applause. Melissa, same question.
Thank you. So in the state of Connecticut, we do help those who need it the most with our Medicaid funding. Medicaid is 50% matched by the federal government. And right now in our state, we have a growing Medicaid contribution where now we are basically paying for about 800,000 people now are served by Medicaid, and it's growing. There are some issues regarding Medicaid reimbursement rates. We've heard over and over again that access to good doctors is sometimes problematic because of those reimbursement rates. Regarding Access Health, I will say, by all reports, certainly, Lieutenant Governor Wyman, who has been leading the charge at Access Health, has done a pretty good job putting that together. However, in the last budget process, we were looking at creating yet another new bureaucracy in an office called the Office of Health Strategy. I think we have to do more, but it should be about listening to the insurance commissioners, treating our hospitals as the friend and economic driver that they are. We are taxing our hospitals at a rate that is extremely concerning. Hospitals are starting to stop offering different benefits, like they used to have like a mobile crisis team that would meet people in the ER so that we wouldn't have what they refer to as frequent flyers, and instead of having them in the ER, which is very, very costly, to do some intervention with wraparound services to reduce those costs. So we have a lot of things that we have to be watching out for, and how we treat our hospital community across the state should also be part of that equation.
Thank you. Norm, follow-up?
So I never really understood Governor Malloy's antipathy towards the hospital community. This is a group that we need to be working with, but we are faced with a crisis. I think Melissa's number was quite telling. 800,000 people in the state of Connecticut avail themselves of Medicaid. This goes back to what I said originally. We have a healthcare crisis in America. It will not fully collapse around us until employer-based healthcare falls apart. And I am telling you as an employer that every year, until the tariffs came into play, health insurance costs for my employees were the single biggest variable cost I faced. Any given year, based on the experience of my group, I could be facing a 10%, 20%, or 30% increase. This is not a sustainable system. It just will not keep working.
Melissa, final thoughts?
I'm all set.
Okay, thank you. Tom has the next question.
So salaries and pension benefits for state employees have a significant impact on the state's budget. Most of those employees are union members working under contracts, and many of those unions have already given back concessions to previously negotiated benefits. Is there anything that the legislature can do to further incentivize these employees to return to the bargaining table in order to restructure current contracts? If so, what types of concessions do you think should be pursued? Melissa.
Thank you. So earlier, my opponent talked about the how it was really the fault of an 1818 tie that drove the budget into October. But I would put the caution flag up and say it was the CBAC vote, which is the state employee bargaining unit that this question is based on, that put us in that spiral, because they chose, the governor and the majority chose to ratify and codify CBAC before a budget was even in place. And I had to fly home from vacation in order to vote no on that package. Another no vote, by the way, Norm. So the reason I voted no was because, again, how could you solidify one component of our state over everybody else and not address the budget? There are things, though, that we can do. For instance, in our Republican proposal, we do a number of things, and it doesn't require us to go back to the negotiating table. Small things, taking overtime out of pension calculations after 2027. We had an actuarial analysis provided to us when we did that work, and it shows that you can save over $20 million a year just by removing overtime out of pensions. Another thing we could potentially do is look how we deal with the cost of living increases. States all around us do it differently. We're one of the few states that do it every year, and it's averaging 3%. Some states wait and do it every 4 years. And that adds to our pension burden. The other thing you should know is when you add all of our pensions together, we have about $80 billion of unfunded pensions on paper. But because of the unrealistic discount rate that our governor and his appointees have been using in the Teachers Retirement Board and other places, it's actually closer to $100 billion. One of the things that came out of the bipartisan budget was something called a volatility cap, which said anything over $3 billion in revenue that you get unexpectedly, one-time revenue, should be automatically deposited in the rainy day fund. And that's exactly why we have $1 billion there right now. One of the things I wanted to have happen, and we weren't successful in getting it done, was to split that into thirds and make huge lump sum payments on our unfunded pension liabilities. We could have taken and spent over almost $300 million to pay down the state employee retirement system, the teacher retirement system, and then left a third in the rainy day fund. If we had done that, we could have saved $60 million in debt service. We need to have really a lot of different opportunities and solutions, but that starts by willing to do something that our neighbor states have already done in Rhode Island. There's no reason why we can't do it as well.
Norm, please.
Thank you. So I think that it's important to note how we got here. I actually read the pension study that was done by the consulting company in Cambridge. The state of Connecticut, under Republican governors and Democratic and Republican legislators, just found other ways to spend the money, and they've been completely irresponsible in making the payments that they should have been made. They had higher, not unreasonable for the time, discount rates in the pension calculation. I understand finance pretty well, and I will tell you that the discount rate that they anticipate now is lower because fixed income has been lower for a while, but it's probably going to bounce up as interest rates go up. I think that in the end, I'm the only one at the table here who's negotiated union contracts, who's actually managed the town's pensions with the retirement committee, who deals with the pension company, who deals with employees. I don't know how Melissa thinks that we're going to wave a wand. You know, she talked about 2027. We have 10 years to get to until we get to 2027. It's going to take a lot of work. I think that the unions have given up a lot already. Tier 2, Tier 3, and now Tier 4 employees, their pension plans are actually quite well funded. It's the Tier 1s. It's a lot of retired people. You know, there's actually no way to get them back to the table unless you sit down and negotiate with them. I'm not saying that Dan Malloy did a good job with that, but you can't make them do it. You can try to deal with things in the out years, but you're not going to get us through the next 10 years. I want to address the other idea about mandating rainy day fund money anywhere. In Essex, we've had big surpluses, knock on wood, for the last several years, and every year the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance and a town meeting discuss what to do with them. Our rainy day fund is about 12% of our annual budget. $1 billion in the rainy day fund is 5% of the budget or less. Mandating that some of that go into pensions when you're not prepared for any crisis is not a good idea. Not saying you shouldn't do it, but I'm definitely saying you shouldn't mandate it. I've sat on the phone with Standard & Poor's. I've discussed with them what they thought was a reasonable amount of money for the town to have in the bank, and it was nowhere near 5%. They were actually telling us that at our 12%, we were low based on the national average. Connecticut needs a rainy day fund because Lord knows there are rainy days that come.
Melissa, minute to reply, please.
Thank you. So the notion that the majority party wants to leave the money in the rainy day fund for a rainy day, how I wish that was the truth. But the truth is that they develop new programs at a whim every year. Free college. We've heard all of these things. And I'm sorry, I don't trust those folks who have been constantly proposing new programs, have been spending your tax dollars in an irresponsible way to steward over $1 billion. I don't trust them to do that. My fear is that they're going to drain the rainy day fund to deal with the deficits, and dealing with your pensions and the unfunded liabilities is the smart thing to do. Leaving a third in the rainy day fund, that's the right thing to do. We can't continue to ignore these unfunded liabilities like somebody has a magic wand and they're just going to wave it over and make it disappear. It's going to take tough negotiations, and it starts, of course, with the governor's office.
Please hold your applause.
So, excuse me, I would say that leaving 1/3 of the amount of money in the rainy day fund puts us at 1.5%. That does not allow us to go through a recession. It does not allow us to deal with any decline in state revenue. It's an irresponsible amount of money. And I've combed over the budget and seen which legislators put what in the budget. And I will tell you that the spending spree on the part of the state and its legislators and its town has been quite bipartisan. The Republicans for a long time have had the luxury of voting no, but they've had as many things in the budget as the Democrats. It's quite unfortunate, but it is the way they operate. And I agree, it's actually time for a change up there.
Thank you, Norm. Norm, you get the next question first. So, each year, it seems as though the legislature and governor wait until the last minute to enact a budget, and bills are passed after marathon sessions that take place at the 11th hour. Sometimes the content of these bills is unclear or unrelated to their titles. What can be done to develop a common-sense approach to legislating that would result in a more deliberative and transparent process?
Who's first?
Norm.
So it's always been crazy to me that they go into session in February and they don't really start talking about material things until April. I don't know what the hell they do for that time, but I think that budgeting actually should start on the day that they get there. I don't like the idea, and I will say that that the idea about going to appropriations first and then figuring out where the money comes from as a process thing is just crazy. You have to know how much money you have and then figure out the best way to spend it. So I think that there's a process there that's actually quite deliberate. That process allows for a lack of transparency in the process. I think things happen in the last 5 or 10 days that nobody could figure out. You never know what's coming out, and that is part of the problem and part of the process that needs to change.
Yeah, Melissa, same question.
Thank you. It's actually been a bill proposal that I've been really trying to advocate for quite some time, along with other legislators. I'm not the only one who is frustrated by this. Like Norm mentioned, for whatever reason, historically, the legislature, controlled by the majority, has always started with appropriations, the spending side of the budget, and then gone to the Revenue Committee, second committee, to talk about how much money they have, and by the way, how much money they might need to raise in order to meet the spending levels that the legislature dictates. I've pushed very much to end that process and instead develop a Ways and Means Committee so that you have your spending and revenue together at one time so you can really prioritize the things that matter together. And it's something that can be easily done. When the session begins, the very first thing you vote on are joint rules. And the joint rules of the chamber dictates which committees are going to be formed and what their makeup is. There's no reason why that can't happen on day one of the legislature. We've tried to do it over and over again and have failed. It's something that's critically important because you in your own home don't decide to go out and spend money without checking your checking account balance to see how much money you have. But that's exactly what happens at the legislature. No one is more frustrated with that process than I am. In fact, at least 2 times last session, while I was in the back with other leaders, unfortunately looking to cut the budget again because our revenues had declined. And when I looked up and heard the debate on the floor, we were debating something about posting a website on the Department of Public Health's webpage so that people could look up and find lactation consultants. Now, is lactation consultants something that's unnecessary? Of course not. It's very important for a lot of people, but it doesn't require legislation to post something on a website. That's a call to the commissioner. So I dropped my budget books in my leader's office and made my way to the floor and pressed my button and got up and talked about it. Because it's absolutely ridiculous that your tax dollars are being wasted in these sessions debating bills that absolutely don't need legislation in order to be enacted. Earlier, I was accused of being somebody who got up and said no all the time. I'm really the person who literally says what you are all thinking, and when I see that happening, I immediately make my way to the chamber and let them know what is our priority? The budget. That's what we should be talking on, and once that's discussed, all of those well-intentioned bills can certainly come after the fact. But we need to prioritize that, and I'm sorry, I've been leading that charge all along.
Okay, thank you. Please hold your applause. Tom has the next question. And goes to Melissa.
So, did you want to do rebuttals?
Oh, I'm sorry, did I skip the rebuttals? I did, didn't I? You want to do rebuttal?
I don't know how they get there, but I think that making sure that there's a central location for women to find lactation consultants is a good idea. I'm not sure that it requires legislation, but if the commissioner of the Department of Health thought it did, he must have had a good reason to believe that. But I do agree that we spend too much time on other things and not enough time on the problem of the budget. All that said, simply, dealing within a spending cap and having this ever-growing fixed cost that never goes down, it only goes up because of the irresponsibility for 45 years. We have to see how we can continue to provide those essential services to people in the state. That's the real problem. It's not that there's runaway spending on other things, it's that the fixed costs of running the state keep going up, and we're squeezing out the dollars to grow the economy and take care of people. That's the real challenge.
First of all, that issue was not brought up by the DPH commissioner. It was a brand new freshman legislator trying to get, something to put down. Here's something I accomplished. Again, well-intentioned, but it certainly wasn't the DPH commissioner's idea to craft legislation to post something on his own website. That's not how that works. I could go on and on about the different kinds of bills that are debated in that building starting in April and May before we get to a budget. Again, well-intentioned, but we have a short amount of time. Unlike my opponent, I look at it as a 2-year process. We have 2 years to make an impact. We have literally 4 months when we're in session to get our job done, and we should be focusing on what is the most important and prioritizing that right at the beginning, and I'm the only one who's been pushing that for the last 4 years since I've been ranking member of the Budget Committee.
Okay. So next question, we'll begin with Melissa. Please describe an unpopular or controversial cause or position that you fought for, why you chose to do so, and whether or not you feel you are successful.
Thank you. Well, I think probably the two I mentioned earlier. Certainly the legalization of marijuana has been a conversation, not just in the legislature, with my friends, my constituents, And it's something that I really have spent a lot of time talking to people who disagree with me. Because it's only when you truly listen to those who disagree with you that you can either do two things. One, make it better, or possibly be convinced to change it. And that's something that I've done specifically on that issue. It's been very difficult, especially with some of my more conservative friends, to have that conversation. But I don't shy away from those tough conversations. I have them every time. Secondly, the passport to parks. You know, you called it a tax, okay? The reality is we have a failing park system, and we have less and less employees within DEEP. We have trails that are not managed. We have parks that are not guarded with lifeguards. Parks and our natural resources are critically important to this state. And I made a choice. Do I create an appropriated, dedicated account for our park system with $5 a year registration and watch those dollars go towards the park system and that's it? Or do I just stand up and throw my arms in the air and do nothing? I chose to do something, and again, it wasn't easy, and if I'm state senator, I can assure you I'll be looking to go and refine that program at the beginning of the session. It's something I'm very passionate about. But we have to do something for our park system. We just have to. But when you look at all the invasive issues that we have, whether it's emerald ash borer, whether it's invasives in our waterways, whether it's the lack of lifeguards at our beaches, these are all critical issues, and I did find a way to try and get a cooperative way to manage them. It's not perfect. I'm hoping to make some changes to that program, but it's not easy to go to the legislature and try to get 186 legislators to agree with you. It takes time and a willing to listen, and listening is something that I pride myself on at the Capitol.
Hold your applause, please.
Ready, Norm?
So I'm actually happy to say that because I serve in local government, we don't have that kind of process here. It's easy to convince people to do reasonable things. But I do have to talk about the process of the legislature. Last year, in the off year, there were 2,500 bills that were proposed. 2,500. I can't possibly wrap my head around what 2,500 pieces of legislation the state needs. And I think that part of that is endemic in the people who go up to the legislature. Everybody goes up there with a pet issue. Everybody goes up there with a desire to be able to go home and say, I did this and I signed on to this. I'm not sure that that's an appropriate way to deal with things. We had an issue around here where one of the local weekly newspapers was tossing the newspaper in people's driveways, and I called up the publisher of the newspaper and I said they really have to change that. People are getting upset. We have people who go away for the winter. They don't want newspapers piling up in their driveway. They used to deliver them by mail. One of the legislators in the district, and they will go nameless, suggested that he propose a piece of legislation. That's just the last thing we should be doing. It's kind of absurd to think that everything needs legislation. That said, I think that having the kind of personality that I have, where I work with people, I bring people together all the time, every day. You know, I got elected 2-1 last time, and I think I did that because I worked hard for the last 6 years as first selectman, worked with everybody, take care of everybody in this town, in Essex, as though it doesn't matter what party they are. You call me, I respond, I work with people, I listen. It's just the way I am. I've been a consensus builder my whole life. And actually, that's the main reason that I want to go to the state Senate. I know what it is to do that. I know what it would be to do that within my own caucus, and I know what it would be to do that with people on the other side of the aisle, not on 1 or 2 issues, but on a broad berth of issues like the budget. I think that we have big problems The fixed expenses are going to squeeze out every other service the state needs to provide, and we're going to need to come up with a way to grow the economy to make sure that we have more revenue, because it's not going to happen without more revenue. It's just not going to happen.
Anything to add, Melissa? Okay, thank you.
So, okay, last question of the evening. And this goes to Norm first. Many voters, particularly independents, have become discouraged by the tribalism of party politics and would prefer a more cooperative and collegial atmosphere in Hartford. As a small step towards making that happen, what's the nicest thing you can say about your opponent? Do you need 3 minutes?
Who goes first?
I don't think he needs 3 minutes.
I could spend a while on that. Actually, I think Melissa's a very competent legislator. I really do, and I think she works hard for the people that she represents. I think she's wrong, and I don't think she has the skill set, but I think she is working hard for the people that she tries.
Wait.
I had 3 minutes. Come on. No, I actually have enjoyed this race. Different than the last one, but I think it's been interesting.
Melissa, same thing?
Thank you. So I would say that certainly over the last 8 months, because while you folks are, watching us, maybe the first time seeing us together, we've certainly been on the campaign trail for a long time. One of the things I guess I would say that's about Norm is clearly he loves his family. He's definitely a dedicated partner to Jackie, who I only met briefly while she was spending his money at a farmer's market. Remember that, Norm?
Yes.
I said, Norm, what are you doing here? And he's like, I can't get her out of here quick enough. She's spending so much money on plants. So I never got a chance to meet her. But, clearly, he loves his family. He's been a very successful businessman, and I hope he can give me plenty of time to consult next year on his economic drivers and his policy ideas. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're running short on time, and I don't think you really need a rebuttal, I hope, on either one of those. So
No.
We're going to move on to the closing statements, and Melissa gets the first of those. Let me know when you're ready.
So thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who's attended tonight to listen to not only myself but my opponent. I've said this elsewhere, and I'll continue to repeat it. The single greatest issue facing our state is our fiscal crisis. We're looking at a $4.5 billion deficit and massively underfunded employee and teacher pension system. Our state is sick. We need to deliver tough medicine. The solutions won't be easy, but I'm ready to continue to work with other problem solvers, no matter their party affiliation. The report issued by the Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth is a good start, and those recommendations should be fully debated. This is my 4th election for state office, and clearly the most negative I have ever experienced. A day does not go by without a friend or neighbor sharing another flyer or grainy picture produced by my opponent. However, I remain focused on my dedicated public service and talking with tens of thousands of voters about my hope for Connecticut while listening to their ideas. I've been endorsed again by the Independent Party of Connecticut and the National Federation of Independent Businesses. I'm proud to have received various awards in the legislature from a statewide land trust organization and the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters, to name a few. My unwavering support for our natural resources is well documented. Unlike my opponent, if elected, I can walk into the Capitol on day one and utilize the working relationships to work immediately on the $40 billion two-year state budget. I will address the flawed state budget process, working to finalize that budget long before session adjourns. And finally, I will always treat your tax dollars carefully while giving the job 100% of my focus and attention rather than some of my free time. I'm at your service. It would be an honor to be your voice at the state Senate, and I hope I've earned your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Norm?
Thank you. Tonight we've talked about issues that face our district and our state. My positions in many cases are opposite those of my opponent and how they would affect our towns. There are lots of examples. She voted against state bond funding for projects like infrastructure improvements that impacted Chester Village West, improvements for Platwood Park and Deep River, ensuring safe and potable water in Tylerville, and affordable and elderly housing in Essex. I believe all of those projects deserve the support they eventually got. My opponent also voted to drastically cut the state's Medicare savings program, ending benefits completely for 85,000 seniors all over the state. In Essex, we adopted policies to help seniors by doubling the rebate for the Senior Property Tax Relief Program and expanding the threshold so more seniors could become eligible. That's a stark contrast, but there's more to know about what you're getting if you elect me. I'll go to Hartford as a business and municipal leader who's created jobs, who's helped make his small town home to over 700 businesses, improved education and services, and kept taxes amongst the lowest in the state. I'll go to Hartford as someone who has streamlined town government to make it more efficient and more responsive. I'll go to Hartford as a manager who has created years of balanced budgets and as the manager who has actually been responsible every day for delivering those services that make the budget work in the real world. Last but not least, I'll go to Hartford not as someone who is ingrained in a failed system, but as a problem solver who has worked every day with Democrats, Republicans, and independents to create an inclusive dialogue. This election is all about the economy of our state and our district. And in 2 weeks, you will decide on the person best qualified to help rebuild it. Someone whose ideas are limited to rearranging boxes on a spreadsheet, or a business builder who has a proven record of economic development and job creation. I'd like to thank our hosts from the Haddam and Essex Libraries, and special thanks to everyone who came here tonight to hear this discussion.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes our debate, and please don't forget to vote on November 6th.